In a world that claims to have moved on from its ugly past, some scars still hide beneath the surface, especially in the places we least expect, like a so-called inclusive university campus. When a brilliant new black professor walks into a prestigious university, all he wants is to teach, to uplift, and to lead. But instead he walks straight into a hornet's nest of racism, jealousy, and cruel calculated bullying, led not by students alone, but backed by a broken system. They mocked his accent, they laughed at his clothes, they whispered lies behind his back. But what they didn't know is who he really was, because this professor, he wasn't just a scholar. He was a former intelligence analyst, a child of the civil rights movement, and a man trained to dismantle injustice, not with fists, but with precision, patience, and unstoppable brilliance. What happened next didn't just change the school, it changed the game. This is the story of how a black professor turned torment into triumph, and left an entire university in shock. Only on A1 Storyteller, where the quiet ones always have the loudest impact. The September sun peeked through the tall oaks lining the gates of Hawthorne University, one of the most prestigious and quietly elitist colleges on the East Coast. The air buzzed with the usual campus energy, skateboard wheels scraping across concrete, undergrads laughing over overpriced lattes, and professors power-walking to their early morning lectures. But today, there was a different kind of energy. Whispers swirled among faculty members, texts flew in private group chats, and in the heart of it all stood a man whose calm presence carried the gravity of a mountain. Dr. Elijah Cole, tall, mid-40s, smooth dark skin, short fade, sharp suit, no lanyard needed. His presence introduced him before any name tag ever could. With a leather messenger bag slung over one shoulder and a notebook tucked under his arm, he looked more like a diplomat than a college professor. But Dr. Cole wasn't here to impress anyone. He was here to teach. The university had touted his arrival with great fanfare. Hawthorne welcomes diversity, trailblazer in ethics and philosophy. It was their way of polishing the optics, another checkbox on their "look how inclusive we are" report. But Elijah had seen this game before. He'd taught at 3 other top-tier schools. In each, he came in celebrated only to be subtly disrespected, doubted, and left to fight for basic human decency in staff meetings where people claimed to be colorblind. Yet, Hawthorne felt different. Not better, just more dangerous. Here, elitism wasn't loud. It was weaponized in whispers. As he walked into Founders Hall, heads turned. Some students smiled politely, others stiffened, eyes narrowing. Staff members nodded coolly, their smiles tight, rehearsed. At the front desk, a white woman with icy blonde hair glanced up and frowned slightly. "Yes?" she asked. "Elijah Cole. I'm the new ethics professor, room 212. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard. "Do you have a faculty ID?" "Not yet," he replied evenly. "Orientation said it would be waiting here." She stared a beat too long, then finally clicked around and retrieved a plain envelope. "Next time, just use the staff entrance." Elijah didn't flinch. Noted. As he walked away, her lips curled. "Welcome to Hawthorne," she muttered under her breath. Room 212 was small, intimate, and filled with 25 bright-owned students from Hawthorne's honors program, philosophy majors, pre-law students, even a few journalism kids looking to boost their GPA. Elijah placed his leather bag on the desk, adjusted his watch, and calmly observed the room. Silence. They stared at him, some respectfully, some not so much. In the back row, a trio of smirking students exchanged glances. One of them, a tall blonde named Hunter Calloway, leaned over to his buddy and whispered, "Didn't know they were importing professors now." The other chuckled. "Bet he teaches more about oppression than ethics." Elijah heard them. He didn't flinch. He uncapped his pen and wrote a single word on the board. Power. Then he turned around. "Welcome to Ethics 101. My name is Dr. Elijah Cole. In this room, we'll be discussing what power is, who has it, and how it's used, ethically or otherwise." He paused, locking eyes with Hunter for just a second. "By the end of this course, I promise you one thing. You will either earn your voice or realize you've been misusing it." The next few weeks at Hawthorne University were both uneventful and turbulent for Dr. Elijah Cole. As expected, his presence was a topic of quiet fascination for some, passive hostility for others. He made a point to keep his head down, focus on his lectures, and ignore the subtle jabs. That was until one chilly Thursday morning when he encountered Dean Richard Larkins, the university's head administrator, after class. "Dr. Cole," Larkins said, his voice smooth as if it were rehearsed, "I wanted to check in with you. How are you settling in?" Elijah, who had been reviewing notes on his laptop, looked up and nodded. "I'm settling in well. Classes are going smoothly." Larkins smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's good to hear. I've heard some mixed things from your students. Some say you're a little too direct." Elijah raised an eyebrow, trying to suppress the rising irritation in his chest. "Direct? Yes, some students feel uncomfortable with your approach," Larkins continued, glancing at his watch, clearly trying to wrap up the conversation. "But don't worry, I'm sure it's nothing personal." "Of course," Elijah replied, forcing a smile, though his mind raced. He knew exactly what was happening here. Larkins wasn't concerned about his teaching style. He was trying to intimidate him, make him doubt himself. A subtle power move. "I'll be sure to adjust accordingly," Elijah said, standing up. "Thank you for your time, Dean." As Larkins walked away, Elijah took a deep breath. The subtle racism at Hawthorne University wasn't something that could be confronted head-on. At least not yet. But he knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. By the end of the month, the tension at Hawthorne University was palpable. Elijah had felt the cold stares from faculty meetings, the whispered conversations among students, but none of it had prepared him for the audacity of Hunter Calloway. Hunter was the kind of student who stood out, not because of his academic abilities, but because of his smug arrogance and entitlement. He was the type of student who coasted by on privilege, who believed his last name carried weight. Hunter came from a legacy of influential donors to the university. His family had donated millions over the years, and he carried that sense of superiority everywhere he went. It was during a particularly heated class discussion that Hunter made his move. "Professor," Hunter interjected, "I'm not sure I understand your point about ethics. If power is so relative, how do you explain the fact that people like my family have achieved success while others have failed? Is that not proof that some people are simply more capable of wielding power than others?" The question hung in the air, dripping with condescension. Elijah paused, feeling every eye in the room turn toward him, the weight of their judgment heavy on his shoulder. It was clear that this was no innocent question. It was an attack. He could feel the eyes of the other students, some of them anxious, others eager for drama. Hunter had made it clear that he wasn't asking for understanding. He was asking to assert dominance. Elijah's gaze locked on Hunter, and for a brief moment the classroom fell into complete silence. "I'm glad you asked that, Hunter," Elijah said calmly, his voice measured but with an edge of confidence that cut through the tension in the room. "You're correct in one thing. People like your family often accumulate power. But that power doesn't come from merit. It comes from systems designed to protect that power. Wealth, legacy, and status are all forms of inherited privilege. And yes, some people are born into it, and others are not. But what they fail to see, and what I teach my students, is that the true measure of power is not who controls it, but who can transform it." Hunter's face tightened, his arrogance flickering for a moment. "The problem," Elijah continued, "is that systems built on inherited privilege are often blind to their own biases. That's why people like you," he paused, letting the words land, "are so often unaware of the harm your power causes to others. But awareness comes with a price, Hunter. And sometimes it comes in the form of a very uncomfortable lesson." The room was dead quiet now. Hunter opened his mouth to respond, but the words never came. His face reddened, and he looked around, realizing that he had made a grave mistake. He had underestimated Elijah. Elijah turned back to the board, writing down the next topic in bold letters: the ethics of power, how power shapes our reality. He wasn't done with Hunter, not by a long shot. Hunter Calloway wasn't the kind of person who took an insult, perceived or real, lying down. For the past few days, Elijah had noticed subtle changes in Hunter's behavior. The usual smugness was replaced by thinly veiled animosity. Hunter made snide comments in class, rolled his eyes whenever Elijah spoke, and constantly challenged his authority. But Elijah was prepared for this. He had dealt with far worse. He had been the subject of covert discrimination before, in every institution he had ever worked for. The difference now was that he was no longer a quiet observer. He was here to make a statement, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been silently bullied into submission. It was during a particularly grueling lecture on the philosophical implications of systemic racism that Hunter made his biggest move. Elijah had been discussing the works of Frantz Fanon and his theories on how colonialism had distorted not just societies, but individuals' perceptions of their own worth. Elijah explained the psychological effects of dehumanization in society, how power, once internalized, shapes a person's identity. Hunter, seated in the front row as always, raised his hand with an exaggerated slowness. The entire class knew what was coming. "Yes, Hunter?" Elijah responded, his tone calm, knowing full well what was about to unfold. "Professor Cole, with all due respect," Hunter began, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "I think you're just pushing your personal political agenda. I mean, we're supposed to be learning philosophy, not how to play the race card every time something goes wrong." A few students looked uncomfortable, others glanced away, and some just stared, unsure of how to react. Hunter's attack was public, and it wasn't just aimed at Elijah. It was aimed at the entire concept of intellectual diversity. If he could undermine Elijah's authority in front of the class, maybe he could strip away his power. But Elijah had prepared for this. With quiet precision, he responded, "Hunter, you misunderstand. This isn't a race card. This is about understanding power dynamics, how they shape our lives, our thoughts, and even the way we perceive others. It's about recognizing that power structures are often invisible to those who benefit from them." Hunter scoffed. "So now I'm supposed to believe that everything I've worked for is because of privilege, and not because I earned it?" Elijah locked eyes with him, his gaze unwavering. "Hunter, what you call work is built upon a foundation of advantages that many others don't have. It's not a question of effort, but of opportunity. You may think you earned everything, but that's the trap. It's the illusion of meritocracy. The real question is, what would you do if your position was suddenly challenged? How would you respond if the system didn't protect you?" Hunter bristled at the insinuation, but didn't have the courage to speak further. Instead, he shot Elijah a glare that said everything. This wasn't over. Days passed, and though Hunter's public aggression had simmered down, the undercurrent of tension continued to grow. Elijah could feel the weight of it in the hallways, in the dining areas, and even in faculty meetings. Hunter wasn't the only one who felt uncomfortable. Some of the other students were beginning to distance themselves from Elijah's class, unsure of where they stood in this intellectual battle. It was clear that Hunter wasn't going to let Elijah's lessons slide. But what was he planning, and how far would he go? It didn't take long for the answer to reveal itself. One evening, Elijah received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "URG, urgent, academic integrity, violation report." His heart sank. He opened it and immediately recognized the name attached to the accusation, Hunter Calloway. The email accused Elijah of using his position to promote personal political views in his lectures. Hunter claimed that Elijah had repeatedly targeted students who held conservative views and had created a hostile environment by discussing race and power dynamics in a way that made certain students uncomfortable. Hunter had filed a formal complaint. The email was a cleverly crafted document filled with half-truths and distortions, but one thing was clear: it was an attack, a well-calculated attempt to remove Elijah from his position. It was no accident that this complaint was filed now, after weeks of tension. Hunter was playing the game, and he was playing it well. Elijah set the email down, taking a moment to process the implications. This wasn't just about teaching anymore. This was about his career, his reputation, his life. But Elijah wasn't a man who backed down from a fight. Not after everything he had endured. He had already won battles far greater than this one. Battles that involved much more than just words on a page, and he would not lose this one. The days after receiving the email were tense. Elijah had prepared for some level of confrontation. He had been warned that his presence would shake things up, but he hadn't anticipated Hunter's move being so calculated. Yet, even as the complaint sat in his inbox, Elijah remained unshaken. He had faced adversity his entire life, and this was no different. By the time the meeting with the university's Academic Integrity Committee was scheduled, Elijah had already begun to gather his evidence. He had copies of his syllabi, his lecture notes, and testimonials from students who had approached him after class, praising his discussions about race, power, and philosophy. It was clear to Elijah that Hunter's complaint was nothing more than a desperate attempt to silence him. On the morning of the hearing, Elijah arrived early. He wore a crisp suit, the sleeves of his shirt rolled up to his elbows. His posture was strong, confident, yet measured. He wasn't there to intimidate, he was there to speak the truth. The room was filled with the usual suspects, the faculty members and administrators who made up the committee. But among them there was one more, Dean Larkins, who had taken a sudden interest in the proceedings. Elijah couldn't help but notice the slight smirk on his face as he greeted him. "Dr. Cole, welcome," Larkins said, his voice smooth yet with a tinge of condescension. "I trust we'll be able to resolve this matter quickly." Elijah nodded politely but said nothing. He had no intentions of making small talk. "Hunter." The next week, the university's response came. Elijah received an email from Dean Larkins inviting him to a private discussion about his future at the university. The tone was polite, but there was an underlying message of uncertainty. Elijah knew that this was the next step in the battle to influence Hunter. Whether he would be allowed to stay, or whether Hunter's influence would be enough to push him out. But Elijah wasn't worried. He had made his case, and now it was time for the world to see what Hawthorne University was really made of. He walked into the meeting with his head held high, ready to face whatever was coming. This wasn't just about a lecture anymore. This was about something bigger, something that would change everything. The week following Elijah's meeting with Dean Larkins was tense. Despite the ambiguity of the email and the request for a private discussion, Elijah had made his peace with the outcome. He knew this fight wasn't just about his career or reputation. It was about something larger, something deeper. It was about standing up for truth, justice, and the right to challenge systems that are often too deeply embedded in society to see. The atmosphere on campus was thick with whispers. Hunter Calloway had started circulating his version of the events, playing the victim while painting Elijah as an oppressive force in the classroom. Students began to choose sides, and the divide became more pronounced by the day. But Elijah wasn't naive. He had been through battles like this before. He wasn't fighting just for himself anymore. He was fighting for every student who had ever been silenced by the weight of discrimination, for every voice that had been drowned out by privilege. And in this fight, Elijah was determined not to lose. The meeting with Dean Larkins finally arrived, and it was everything Elijah had expected. The large, sleek office of the dean was bathed in soft lighting, and the chair across from him sat in silence. Dean Larkins, ever the professional, sat behind his polished desk, his fingers steepled as he looked down at the documents in front of him. "Dr. Cole," Larkins began, his voice measured but holding a slight edge. "We've received a substantial number of complaints regarding your teaching methods. While I admire your passion for your subject matter, I need to be candid with you. Your approach has created division within the student body and faculty." Elijah listened, his gaze unwavering. He had heard these words before, from other administrations and other institutions, but now they were more than just empty threats. They were part of a concerted effort to stifle his voice. "I'm not here to debate my teaching methods, Dean Larkins," Elijah responded calmly. "I'm here to tell you that I will not back down from the truth. I will not stop teaching my students how to think critically about the world around them." Larkins frowned, clearly not used to having his authority challenged so directly. "I understand your stance, Dr. Cole, but you must also understand that the university must maintain its reputation. We cannot afford to have ongoing public disputes. Hunter Calloway has a significant influence here, and I'm afraid you may be putting your future with this institution at risk." There it was, the ultimatum. Elijah knew exactly what was being implied. Either he toned down his lectures and played the game, or he would be forced out. But Elijah wasn't interested in playing the game. "You're asking me to choose between my values and my job," Elijah said, his voice steady. "But those two things cannot be separated. My job as a professor is to push my students to think critically, to challenge the systems that shape their lives. If that's something that's going to cost me my job, then so be it." Larkins leaned back in his chair, clearly taken aback by Elijah's conviction. "I'm afraid you don't understand the consequences of your actions, Dr. Cole. Hunter has the support of powerful alumni, and there are those on the board who are already questioning your place here. You could lose everything." Elijah's expression didn't waver. "I didn't come here to win favor with alumni. I came here to make a difference. If you want me to leave because I refuse to compromise on my principles, then you're going to have to make that decision, not me." There was a long, tense silence. Dean Larkins stared at Elijah for a moment before sighing and picking up a thick file from his desk. He flipped it open, revealing pages of notes and letters that had been submitted to the committee. "I didn't want it to come to this," Larkins said, his voice softening slightly, "but it seems the university is at a crossroads, and I have to make a decision that's in the best interest of everyone. Your future here, Dr. Cole, is uncertain." Elijah nodded slowly. "Then the decision has already been made." That evening, Elijah walked out of the dean's office with a sense of finality. The fight wasn't over, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to give up. He had never been one to back down from a challenge, and he wasn't about to start now. The next few days were filled with tension as news of the conflict spread through the campus. Some students rallied behind Elijah, while others sided with Hunter, still believing the narrative that Elijah's teaching was divisive and inflammatory. But Elijah wasn't concerned with the opinions of those who couldn't see the bigger picture. He was focused on something greater. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, the unexpected happened. A letter arrived from the Board of Trustees. It was addressed to Elijah Cole personally, and its contents would change everything. The letter formally stated that the board had reviewed the situation in detail and had come to a conclusion. Contrary to what Dean Larkins had suggested, the board sided with Elijah. They recognized the importance of his teaching methods and the necessity of addressing uncomfortable truths in an academic environment. Hunter Calloway's complaint had been dismissed, and the university issued an official statement affirming Elijah's right to continue teaching without interference. The days that followed were filled with mixed emotions. Elijah had won, but he knew the battle wasn't over. Hunter Calloway would not simply walk away, and the tensions that had been building on campus had only intensified. Some students cheered his victory, while others felt that the university had sided with an agitator. But Elijah stood firm. He had achieved something far greater than just protecting his career. He had shown his students the power of standing up for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. The journey wasn't over, but Elijah knew this was just the beginning. Weeks passed, and the university returned to a sense of normalcy, or at least as much normalcy as could be expected after the controversy. The students who had supported Elijah felt a quiet pride in his victory, while those who had sided with Hunter Calloway seemed to retreat into the shadows, waiting for their moment. However, despite the official victory, Elijah knew that the peace was fragile. It was only a matter of time before Hunter and his allies would strike again. The victory had been a setback for them, but not a defeat. They would regroup, and when they did, Elijah would need to be prepared. It didn't take long for Elijah's instincts to prove true. A week after the Board of Trustees had made its decision, Hunter Calloway resurfaced, but this time he wasn't alone. He had rallied a group of influential students, mostly from wealthy families with deep ties to the university's board. They had come together, united in their shared belief that Elijah's teaching methods were disruptive, and they had a plan to put an end to him once and for all. Hunter, emboldened by his support, approached Elijah after one of his lectures. He stood outside the lecture hall, flanked by his new allies, and watched as Elijah walked down the hallway. There was an air of menace in his posture, a quiet promise that the fight wasn't over. Elijah knew what was coming, and this time he wasn't going to wait for them to make the first move. He approached Hunter, his expression calm, but "You're wasting your time, Hunter," Elijah said. "You can't silence me no matter how many people you rally behind you." Hunter sneered. It's not about silence, Dr. Cole. It's about getting you to understand that you don't belong here. You're an outsider, and you've overstepped your bounds. The board may have sided with you for now, but that doesn't mean they'll always be on your side. You can't keep shaking up things without consequences. Elijah held his ground, his eyes never leaving Hunter's. I don't need anyone's approval, Hunter. I'm here because I believe in something greater than all of this. I won't back down. Hunter's lips curled into a smile. We'll see how long that conviction lasts. Don't think we'll go away quietly. The next few weeks brought an escalating sense of tension to campus. Elijah noticed that his classes were becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Students who had once been engaged now sat silently, their eyes darting nervously around the room. The quiet whispers in the hallways had turned into open discussions about Elijah's controversial teaching methods. It became clear that Hunter's influence was spreading. Some students had started speaking out against Elijah's lectures, echoing the criticisms that had been raised during the initial complaints. They argued that his discussions were too radical, too divisive. The term reverse racism had even begun to crop up, a label that many used to discredit his teachings on the systemic nature of power. Elijah knew the stakes were rising, but he also understood that he had been through far worse struggles in his life. This was not the first time he had fought against the grain, and it wouldn't be the last. But this time it wasn't just about his survival, it was about the survival of academic freedom. The freedom to challenge ideas, to push boundaries, and to speak uncomfortable truths. Elijah wasn't going to lose this fight, not again. As the pressure mounted, Elijah found himself seeking the support of some of his colleagues. While many faculty members had remained silent throughout the drama, a few had quietly reached out to offer their support. Among them was Dr. Allison Graves, a tenured professor of political science who had been at the university for over 2 decades. She was known for her strong stance on academic freedom and had seen her own fair share of battles with the administration. Dr. Graves had been following Elijah's situation closely and had already voiced her concerns to the faculty senate. When she approached him one afternoon after class, Elijah was taken by surprise. I've seen what they're trying to do, Elijah, she said, her voice low and firm, and I'm not going to let them do it. We can't afford to let them suppress ideas because they're uncomfortable. If we do, we're no better than the very systems we claim to oppose. Elijah felt a surge of relief. For the first time since this all began, he felt like he wasn't alone. I appreciate it, Dr. Graves, Elijah said, grateful for her support. But it's not just about me. If I give in now, they'll have won. It's about ensuring that the students get an education that challenges them, that forces them to question the world they live in. Dr. Graves nodded. Exactly. And if we don't stand up for that, then we're complicit in the very systems we teach about. Together, they began working on a strategy. Dr. Graves had contacts within the faculty senate, and she was able to rally other professors to Elijah's side. Their plan was simple. They would stand united in defense of academic freedom and refuse to allow the administration to silence their voices. It was during the faculty senate meeting that things began to change. The debate was heated, but it was also the first time that the faculty truly came together to discuss the issues at hand. Some professors argued that the university had a responsibility to maintain a neutral environment, while others spoke passionately about the need for intellectual freedom. In the end, it was Dr. Graves who spoke the most powerfully. Academic institutions exist to foster debate, to push boundaries, and to allow ideas to grow, she said, her voice steady and strong. If we give in to the pressures of a few students who feel uncomfortable, we are failing in our mission. Elijah Cole is teaching the very thing that makes higher education worthwhile, critical thought. The room fell silent, and one by one the faculty members began to nod in agreement. By the end of the meeting, the faculty senate had voted overwhelmingly in favor of standing by Elijah. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. Chapter 20. The Final Blow. The victory at the faculty senate meeting had sent shockwaves through the campus. Word had spread quickly. Elijah Cole had not only stood his ground, but he had also rallied enough support to change the course of the battle. But despite this, Hunter Calloway was not one to back down easily. He had lost the battle, but in his eyes the war was far from over. Elijah was ready for whatever came next, but the tension in the air was thick. Everywhere he went, there were whispers. Students who had once been on the fence were now choosing sides. Some feared that standing with Elijah would cost them future opportunities, while others were emboldened by his courage. As the days passed, Hunter began to escalate his tactics. The subtle intimidation of his earlier attempts gave way to more direct methods. One afternoon, as Elijah was preparing to leave campus, he found an anonymous letter slipped under his office door. The letter was a direct threat, written in bold, angry letters. "Keep pushing and we'll make sure you don't leave this university in one piece. We'll bury you in paperwork, discredit you, and destroy your reputation. You'll be nothing but a footnote in history. You're a dead man walking." The message was clear. Hunter wasn't just trying to defeat Elijah academically. He wanted to destroy him completely. But Elijah wasn't intimidated. He'd come too far to let fear dictate his actions now. He took a deep breath and read the letter again, his mind already calculating his next move. He would need to keep his composure to stay focused on his mission. He knew that the more Hunter pushed, the more people would begin to see the truth about who was really behind the harassment. It all came to a head during the final meeting of the semester. The administration had called a special session to address the ongoing conflict, and both Elijah and Hunter were asked to present their sides. It was an opportunity for both of them to lay everything on the table. When the meeting began, it was clear that Hunter had come prepared. He had gathered a large group of students, many of whom were influential on campus, and he began his presentation with a rehearsed speech, filled with complaints about Elijah's teaching methods, the divisive nature of his lectures, and the toxic environment Elijah had created. But when it was Elijah's turn to speak, the room went silent. He stood up slowly, facing both the administration and the students. There was no anger in his voice, no bitterness, only the quiet strength that had carried him this far. "I'm not here to make enemies," Elijah began. "I'm here to teach students how to think, to challenge their beliefs, and to prepare them for a world that's far more complex than we often admit. If that makes me divisive, then so be it. The real problem isn't my teaching style, it's the unwillingness to confront uncomfortable truths." His words were powerful, but it wasn't just what he said that made an impact. It was the way he said it. He spoke with the kind of authority that only comes from knowing that you're right. He had spent his entire life fighting for justice, and he wasn't about to stop now. By the time Elijah finished, the room was silent. Hunter Calloway sat there, fuming, his face red with rage. But the students in the room had begun to shift in their seats. They were beginning to understand the difference between a teacher and a tyrant. And there we have it. Another intense chapter in the battle between Elijah Cole and the forces trying to silence him. What started as a battle for academic freedom has now evolved into a full-blown fight for justice. With each move, Elijah proves that standing up for what's right isn't just about defending your career. It's about defending truth itself. Stay tuned to find out what happens next. Will Elijah's conviction be enough to defeat the power of privilege and fear? Or will Hunter's final blow take him down? Make sure you're subscribed to A1 Storyteller to get all the latest updates on this thrilling saga. If you've enjoyed this journey so far, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Let us know your thoughts. Who do you think will win this battle? Elijah or Hunter? And remember, keep fighting for what's right, because truth always finds a way to rise. Until next time, keep your heart full of courage and your mind sharp as ever.